The little bistro on the corner was warm with the smell of roasted garlic and bread. Families were finishing dinner, couples leaned close over candlelight, and in the middle of it all, a man in a worn jacket walked in. He paused at the door, brushing the late autumn chill from his sleeves, and scanned the room for the table his friend had reserved. He was a single father, used to quiet evenings spent reading to his daughter or helping her with homework. Nights like this, stepping into a place filled with laughter and clinking glasses, felt almost foreign. But tonight carried a fragile hope. A friend had insisted that he try something new, that he meet someone who might see more than the calluses on his hands and the tiredness in his eyes. He found the table by the window and sat down, straightening the silverware the way he always did at home to make his little girl smile. She liked order, liked the way her crayons lined up before she began to draw. Thinking of her steadied him. He checked his watch, its face scratched but still faithful, and thought about the picture she had pressed into his hand before he left. "So you won't be nervous, Daddy," she had whispered. It was a drawing of the two of them at a park, their hands joined. For a moment he let himself imagine what could come from this night. Maybe, just maybe, life had a way of surprising those who carried on quietly. He wanted someone who could laugh with his daughter, someone who could share the load when the nights felt heavy. He wanted to believe that such a person might walk through the door any minute, and then the door opened. A woman stepped inside, tall and confident, her coat draped over her shoulders as if she had just left a boardroom. Her heels struck the floor in steady rhythm, and heads turned the way they often did when she entered a room. She carried herself with the air of someone who always knew where she was going, and who expected the world to move aside if it didn't fit her pace. He watched her approach, heart lifting with cautious hope. He thought, "This is her. This is the one my friend wanted me to meet." For a brief moment, he imagined the night unfolding with easy conversation and maybe even laughter. What he didn't know was that her first words would not be kind, and that this dinner would test him in ways he had never expected. She reached the table with the kind of confidence that filled the space before she even sat down. Sliding the chair back, she gave a quick glance at his jacket, at the watch with its worn strap, and let out a soft laugh that didn't sound friendly. "Well," she said, resting her purse on the chair beside her, "this isn't exactly what I pictured." He blinked, caught off guard, then offered a small smile. "It's nice to meet you," he said simply, his voice steady, though he felt his chest tighten. She didn't return the smile. Instead, she leaned back, eyes sweeping over him as though she were appraising something in a shop window. "You don't really look like my type," she added, her tone light but sharp enough that a couple at the next table turned their heads. The words stung, but he stayed quiet. He thought of his daughter again, how she always told him, "Don't worry, Daddy, just be kind." He held on to that, letting the silence stretch until he could fill it with something gentler. "So," he asked softly, "how was your week?" She waved a manicured hand as though brushing the question aside. "Busy. Meetings, deadlines, the usual. I barely had time to get here tonight." Then she glanced at the menu, already impatient. He nodded, listening the way he always did, even when the words carried no warmth. Part of him wanted to retreat, to end the night early. But another part, the same part that had carried him through long days and longer nights, chose to sit a little straighter, to keep the conversation alive. As she ordered the most expensive dish without looking at the prices, he folded his hands on the table, still wearing that patient smile. He didn't need her approval, not really, but he had promised himself to try, to give this evening a chance, and so he stayed, unaware that every choice he made in these small, quiet moments was already speaking louder than her sharpest words. The server returned with water and menus, but the tension at the table was already set. She glanced at his wrist, her eyes pausing on the scratched watch. "That looks like something my father would have thrown away years ago," she said, with a quick laugh, as if it were harmless banter. He lifted his hand slowly, not to hide the watch, but to remind himself why he wore it. It had been with him through long shifts, hospital visits and birthdays when money was tight but love was not. "It still tells time," he answered simply, his voice calm. The comment rolled off her tongue easily, but the sting sat heavy between them. A couple at the next table shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flicking toward him as though they too had heard enough. When the server came back, she ordered the steak without hesitation, barely glancing at the prices. He chose a simple pasta, the kind he often made at home with his daughter on nights when they laughed more than they ate. She leaned back, studying him the way someone studies a picture that doesn't quite fit the frame. "You know," she said, her voice dipping into that same sharpness, "this restaurant feels a little out of place for you." The words cut deeper than she realised, not because of the jacket on his shoulders, but because of how casually she dismissed him. He looked down at the tablecloth, breathing in slowly. He thought of the crayon drawing folded in his pocket, a reminder that kindness mattered more than pride. So instead of meeting insult with insult, he lifted his eyes and asked, "What do you enjoy most about your work?" His tone held no bitterness, only genuine curiosity. She shrugged, her bracelets clinking softly. "Success, recognition, people knowing who I am." Her smile carried no warmth, only certainty. He nodded, choosing patience once again. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like he was losing the conversation. But in truth, his quiet restraint was the very thing that set him apart. What neither of them knew was that soon, when the room filled with smoke, his strength would speak louder than any word. The plates had not yet arrived, and the room hummed with the quiet rhythm of forks, low laughter, and the clinking of glasses. At their table, though, the air felt colder than the autumn night outside. She scrolled briefly through her phone, her attention clearly elsewhere, while he sat with his hands folded, his eyes calm but distant. He thought of his daughter, waiting at home with her crayons scattered across the kitchen table. She had begged him to tell her a bedtime story before leaving, so he promised that if he got home late, she could sleep with her drawing tucked under her pillow. The thought softened his chest. "She's 7 now," he said suddenly, his voice breaking through the quiet. "Smart as can be. She's been trying to teach me how to braid hair, though I'm still terrible at it." The woman looked up, one brow raised, as if she had missed the point. "7? That must keep you busy," she said before returning her gaze to her phone. But across the room, a couple who had overheard smiled to each other. They could hear the warmth in his tone, the way a father's love coloured every word. He chuckled softly, more to himself than to her. "She likes to line up her crayons before she starts drawing. Everything has to be just so. I think she gets that from me." The woman gave a faint sigh, setting her phone down only to lift her glass again. "Children are fine, I suppose, but I can't imagine having the time for all that." She waved her hand lightly, dismissing the thought. "There are more important things than crayons and bedtime stories." The words hung heavy between them. For a moment he stared at the tablecloth, tracing the lines in the fabric with his eyes. He knew she didn't mean to sound cruel, but the indifference was sharp enough. Still, he chose silence over argument. What he could not know was that this night, which had begun with sharp words and disappointment, was about to turn in a way neither of them could have imagined. Their meals had just been placed on the table when it happened. At first, it was only a faint beeping, soft enough that some diners thought it was part of the music. But then the sharp cry of the fire alarm cut through the restaurant, steady and urgent. The woman set down her glass with a frown. "Really? On a Saturday night?" she muttered, annoyed more than alarmed. He looked toward the kitchen. A thin ribbon of smoke slipped out as a server pushed through the swinging doors, coughing into the sleeve of his shirt. The smell of burning oil followed close behind. Around them, chairs scraped against the floor as people turned their heads, voices rising in confusion. A mother at a nearby table pulled her child close, whispering something meant to calm him. But the boy began to cough, small and harsh. The server who had delivered their meals moments ago stood frozen, glancing between the kitchen and the growing crowd with panic in his eyes. The single father pushed back his chair and stood. His face changed, not in anger, not in fear, but in a kind of calm that came from somewhere deeper. He took in the room, the frightened faces, the smoke drifting heavier now, and he knew exactly what to do. He turned to the boy who was coughing and knelt down, speaking in a steady voice. "It's okay, buddy. Nice slow breaths. Let's get you outside." He handed his napkin to the mother, dampening it with water from her glass so she could hold it gently to her son's face. The room was shifting now. A man called for everyone to stay calm. Another fumbled for his phone. The alarms kept their steady cry, echoing against the walls, and the air grew thicker with smoke. The woman who had mocked him moments ago sat frozen, her eyes wide. For the first time that evening, her confidence seemed to vanish. She looked at him without a word, as though waiting to see what he would do next. And in that moment, with smoke curling upward and panic on the edge of breaking loose, the quiet man in the worn jacket began to show who he really was. The alarm wailed above their heads, piercing and relentless. Smoke pushed through the kitchen doors in restless curls, and for a moment the room teetered between order and panic. Then his voice broke through, calm and steady. "Everyone, let's move to the sidewalk," he called, guiding the coughing boy and his mother toward the exit. He poured water onto a napkin and pressed it gently into her hands. "Hold this over his face. He'll breathe easier," he said, his tone firm but kind. At a nearby table, an older couple struggled to rise. The man's legs shook under his weight, his wife clutching his arm. The father stepped to their side without hesitation, his arm strong beneath the man's shoulder. "Lean on me. We'll take it slow," he said, walking them carefully toward the open door. The crowd, restless a moment ago, began to follow his lead. People who had been frozen in fear now moved with purpose, trusting the quiet authority in his voice. Near the entrance, a young server stood frozen with a phone in her hand. He caught her eye. "Call the fire department. Tell them it started in the kitchen, smoke in the dining room, no injuries so far. Stay on the line." The instruction gave her something solid to hold onto, and she nodded quickly. Step by step, the chaos softened. Families pressed close as they moved outside, children clutching their parents' hands. And at the window, the woman who had laughed at his jacket sat still, her eyes wide, realizing that the man she thought so small was the only one keeping the room from breaking apart. The kitchen doors swung open again, and this time the smoke came thicker, carrying the sharp bite of burning oil. Diners still moving toward the exit gasped and hurried their steps. One of the younger cooks stumbled out, eyes watering, hands trembling with a fire extinguisher he clearly didn't know how to use. The single father reached for it. "I'll take that," he said, calm but firm. He pulled the pin with practiced hands, motioned the cook toward the door, and pushed through the haze into the kitchen. Inside, a pan had tipped over, flames licking the wall where grease had splattered. The heat pressed close, but he didn't hesitate. He aimed low, sweeping the extinguisher until the fire sputtered and shrank. The room hissed with white powder, smoke curling upward as the flames died down. He glanced around quickly, making sure no one else was trapped. A woman near the back door was coughing hard, her apron pressed to her face. He hurried to her side, guiding her arm over his shoulder. "Let's get you out," he said, steady as ever. She leaned into him, her legs shaky, but his grip was strong enough to bring her safely into the dining room. On the other side of the glass, the woman who had come for a blind date watched with wide eyes. Her hands, which had so confidently held a wineglass minutes before, now gripped the edge of the table. The smirk she had worn earlier was gone, replaced by something she hadn't expected to feel: awe. He led the coughing cook through the crowded doorway, murmuring reassurance until she found her breath again in the night air. The diners who had already made it outside began to clap softly, relieved and grateful. Children clung to their parents, whispering about the man in the worn jacket who had walked straight into the smoke without fear. The woman by the window felt her cheeks flush, though not from the heat. It was shame. Shame that she had judged so quickly, spoken so sharply, and dismissed the very man who was now the reason everyone was safe. But she said nothing yet. She only watched as he handed the extinguisher to the manager, gave a quick nod, and prepared himself for whatever might come next. The sirens grew louder until the glow of red lights swept across the front windows. A moment later, firefighters rushed in, their boots striking the floor in quick, sure steps. Diners who had gathered on the sidewalk stepped aside, making room. The man in the worn jacket guided the last group of guests out the door, steadying an elderly woman by the arm as her husband followed close behind. When he turned back, the youngest firefighter spotted him. Relief broke across the young man's face, and his voice carried over the noise. "Captain, you're here?" The word cut through the night. Several heads turned at once. The single father gave a small nod, not proud, not seeking attention, just acknowledging the recognition. He began rattling off details with calm precision, where the fire had started, how much had already been contained, and who might still need medical checks. The firefighters listened without question, scribbling notes, their movements suddenly sharper. On the sidewalk, the diners exchanged looks of surprise. The quiet man they had seen mocked over dinner was clearly no ordinary guest. He was one of them, one of the people who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. The woman by the window felt her breath catch. A flush of heat rose in her cheeks, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. It was from the realization of just how wrong she had been. Every insult she had thrown at him echoed back in her mind. The jacket she had laughed at, the watch she had mocked, the simple way he spoke, all of it now looked entirely different. Children pointed at him with wide eyes, whispering, "He's the one who helped us out." Parents murmured thanks as they held their little ones close. Even the restaurant manager, still shaken, placed a hand over his chest in gratitude. The man only nodded, checking once more to be sure no one had been left behind. His calm presence seemed to anchor the entire street. He wasn't chasing recognition, he was simply doing what he had always done, protecting lives, even if most people never saw it. And as the crowd began to understand who he really was, the woman who had walked in with so much pride felt her heart shift in a way she hadn't expected. The street outside the bistro was quieter now. The last of the smoke drifted into the night while firefighters packed up their gear. Most of the guests had gone home, but a few lingered, talking in hushed voices about the man in the worn jacket who had steadied them all. She stood apart from the crowd, arms folded as if to hold herself together. Her mind kept replaying the sharp words she had thrown at him earlier, her laughter at his jacket, the way she dismissed him as out of place. Every line stung now, heavier than she could carry. He was nearby, speaking with one of the younger firefighters who hung on his every word. He wasn't loud, he wasn't proud, he was just steady. Exactly as he had been inside when fear threatened to take over. Her throat tightened. She had spent the evening proving her success, her importance, yet in the end it was his quiet strength that everyone would remember. Taking a shaky breath, she walked toward him. For the first time that night, she felt small, not because he made her so, but because her own pride had crumbled. She stopped in front of him, searching for words. "I was wrong," she said finally, her voice low. "I judged you before I even gave you a chance, and you didn't deserve that." He studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "People miss a lot when they only look on the surface," he said. His tone was soft, almost forgiving. The words sank deep, not as a lesson, but as a truth she could feel. She blinked against the sting in her eyes, realizing that his kindness was the very thing that had kept her safe tonight. And for the first time in years, she felt humbled. Grateful not just for what he had done, but for the way he carried himself without anger or pride. The firefighters were finishing their checks, rolling up hoses, and speaking with the manager about the damage. Most of the diners had drifted away, eager to get home and shake off the night. But a small cluster still lingered, reluctant to leave the man who had steadied them when panic threatened to take over. She stood there watching him. The jacket she had mocked was now dusted with white powder from the extinguisher, the cuffs smudged from smoke. Yet to her eyes it carried more dignity than the finest coat in her closet. "I want to help," she said at last, her voice steadier now. He turned toward her, surprise flickering across his face. "You mentioned your station runs a program, smoke detectors, car seats for families who can't afford them. I'd like to cover everything you need. No speeches, no credit. Just let me do it." For the first time that night, his guarded expression softened into a genuine smile. "That would make a difference," he said quietly. "More than you realise." She nodded, relief washing over her. It wasn't just about money, it was about making right what she had broken with her words. And in offering to give, she felt lighter, as if a weight had finally slipped from her shoulders. The street was almost empty now. The autumn air carried a hint of wood smoke from somewhere far off, and the night felt calmer than it had any right to be. She looked at him once more, this time without judgment or pride. "Maybe next time," she said, "we could meet somewhere simpler. Coffee at the park, maybe? I'd like to meet your daughter." He hesitated only a moment, then gave a quiet nod. "She'd like that," he said, tucking his hands into the pockets of his worn jacket. They stood there for a breath, not as adversaries on a disastrous date, but as two people who had been changed by a night neither of them had expected. And as he finally turned to leave, the message of the evening lingered, unspoken but clear. True worth isn't found in what someone wears or what they own. It's revealed in the way they show up when it matters most. And so the night ended, not with the clink of glasses or the promise of romance, but with something far more lasting. A reminder that true worth is never measured by jackets, watches or titles. It shows itself in quiet strength, in responsibility, and in the way a person rises when others need them most. The lesson is simple. Never rush to judge someone by what you see on the surface. You may be overlooking a kind of courage and dignity that only reveals itself in the hardest moments. Now let me ask you, have you ever misjudged someone at first sight, only to later discover a strength or kindness you didn't expect? Share your thoughts below and let's keep this conversation alive. Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll see you again tomorrow night, right here on Rain Inside.